Imagine a young king of only 13 years old, weakened by leprosy, ascending to the throne of the most sacred and vulnerable of the Crusader kingdoms. Meanwhile, to the north, in the lands of Syria, a cunning and tireless warrior begins one of the most ambitious campaigns of his career, the siege of the powerful city of Aleppo. This is the backdrop of what we are going to explore today. The year is 1174, and the pieces on the political chessboard of the Middle East are repositioning at dizzying speed. In this video, we will understand how Saladin, still consolidating his authority in Egypt and Syria, tries to extend his domain over Aleppo, a rival stronghold that represents both a threat and a promise of supremacy. And on the other side, we will see Baldwin, newly enthroned in the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, closely observing the Muslim advance and pondering his first political decisions in the face of an enemy that was growing before his eyes. Stay until the end to discover how this movement in Aleppo changed the balance of power in the region and revealed Saladin's military and diplomatic genius, all under the watchful eye of a leper king who would never underestimate his adversary. In the 12th century, the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem was a fragile Crusader construction in the heart of the Middle East, surrounded by Muslim powers in constant reorganization. After the death of Nur ad-Din, ruler of Damascus and Aleppo, in 1174, a dangerous power vacuum opened in Syria. To the south, Saladin, then vizier of Egypt, acted quickly to consolidate his position as heir to the jihad against the Crusaders. Meanwhile, the newly crowned Baldwin faced internal and external challenges, aware that every move made by Saladin would shape the future of Christendom in the East. The year was 1174, and the sudden death of Nur ad-Din Zengi, the powerful emir of Damascus and Aleppo, triggered a deep political crisis in Muslim Syria. His legitimate heir, the young As-Salih Ismail, was still a child, which weakened the Zengid dynasty's control over its territories. It was in this vacuum that Saladin, then Lord of Egypt and technically a vassal of Nur ad-Din, saw the opportunity to transform his subordinate position into full sovereignty. Saladin had consolidated Egypt after the fall of the Fatimids, but he knew that as long as Aleppo and other Syrian cities remained loyal to the Zengids, his power would always be limited. Driven both by ambition and strategic calculation, he marched with his army northward, proclaiming that he acted in the name of Islamic unity and holy war against the Crusaders. But in practice, he sought to secure personal control over Damascus, Homs, and especially Aleppo. The city of Aleppo, however, was a tough nut to crack. Commanded by Gumushtakin, a regent loyal to young As-Salih, the city resisted tenaciously. Saladin, after taking Damascus without much resistance, besieged Aleppo with a large army, hoping that surrender was only a matter of time. But the siege, begun in the summer of that year, proved more difficult than expected. Meanwhile, in the south, Baldwin, newly crowned and physically weakened by leprosy, demonstrated impressive political lucidity. The young king recognized that the fragmentation of Muslim power played in favor of the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. If Saladin were to unify Egypt and Syria, the threat to his kingdom would be terrible. Therefore, the siege of Aleppo represented a critical moment. If Saladin won, the balance of power would change drastically. Baldwin then decided to discreetly support the defenders of Aleppo. Crusader troops, in alliance with some Muslim leaders hostile to Saladin, such as the Artukids of Mardin and the Lords of Mosul, began to move in the region. This indirect military pressure forced Saladin to adopt a defensive posture. The siege, which had seemed close to a conclusion, turned into a stalemate. Despite the difficulties, Saladin remained in the field for months, trying to negotiate and force the surrender of Aleppo. He also used religious propaganda, proclaiming that his cause was just and sanctioned by Sunni Islam against Shiite heretics and the Crusaders. His charisma and diplomatic skill attracted many Syrian warriors and leaders to his side. However, faced with growing external military pressure and the city's stubborn resistance, Saladin was forced to lift the siege at the end of 1174. Although he did not conquer Aleppo at that time, his prestige grew enormously. He had demonstrated initiative, courage, and skill in dealing with a complex crisis. Syria knew from then on that Saladin was no longer just the vizier of Egypt, but a sovereign in his own right. Baldwin, in turn, watched everything closely. The young king had quickly learned that politics in the East required more than swords. It required cunning. And if Saladin had not taken Aleppo, he had made it clear that he was no ordinary enemy, but someone destined to become the greatest rival Jerusalem would face in its entire history. The failure in the siege of Aleppo was not a common defeat. For Saladin, it meant a bitter political lesson. Although his name was increasingly strong among Sunnis, the old Zengid apparatus still held deep loyalties in northern Syria. At the same time, the siege demonstrated to the Muslim world that Saladin was willing to go beyond protocol and vassalic etiquette to shape the region in his image. The prestige gained with the conquest of Damascus partially compensated for the withdrawal from Aleppo, and his reputation as the new leader of Sunni Islam grew. For Baldwin, that episode was much more than a battle between Muslims. It was a rehearsal for what would become the long conflict with Saladin. Still in the early months of his reign, Baldwin watched with the eyes of a statesman. He knew that the union of the Muslim territories would be fatal for the Crusader states. At only 13 years old, his body already showed signs of leprosy, numbness, fatigue, joint pain, but his mind was extraordinarily clear. Saladin's presence in the north provoked unease, but it also offered Baldwin time to strengthen the kingdom and consolidate alliances. During this same period, the young king initiated contact with Armenian lords and neighboring Crusader states, seeking a unified front in case Saladin advanced. He also relied on his tutor and regent, Milon of Plancy, although this figure was about to be removed from the game due to internal intrigues. Baldwin was beginning to realize that, beyond external threats, the true challenge was to maintain cohesion within his own kingdom, divided by family interests, noble rivalries, and disputes among the great military orders. Meanwhile, Saladin returned to Egypt to reorganize his armies and further consolidate his authority. The attempt to take Aleppo had not borne immediate fruit, but it had shown that he was willing to break with the Zengid model and build something new. In his letters and proclamations, he presented himself as the protector of Sunni orthodoxy and the legitimate successor of the jihad against the infidels. It was a powerful message, one that resonated both in the mosques of Cairo and in the aristocratic halls of Damascus. Aleppo, in turn, became a symbol of resistance and rivalry within the Muslim world. The tension between the House of Zengi and Saladin would persist for a few more years, until in 1183 the Sultan would finally conquer the city. But in 1174, the stalemate served as a warning to all the Crusader kingdoms. Egypt and Syria were about to unite under one banner. Baldwin understood that this adversary was different from all previous ones. Saladin was not just a warrior, but a strategist, a religious leader, and a patient politician. In the following years, the leper king would make decisions that showed he understood the magnitude of the threat. He would invest in fortresses, reorganize alliances, and even march personally into battle, defying his own physical condition. But all of this began here, before Aleppo, with a siege that seemed distant, but whose echo would resonate deeply in the halls of Jerusalem. The siege of Aleppo was not merely a failed attempt at conquest. It was the harbinger of an era of colossal confrontations. And at the center of this scene, two names began to stand out: Saladin, the unifier, and Baldwin, the king who would resist with every fiber of his body and spirit, even as these began to fail him. The siege of Aleppo in 1174 marked the beginning of a new era in the Middle East. On one side, Saladin emerged as the force capable of reunifying the Muslims under a single banner, not just by the sword, but through charisma and political legitimacy. On the other, Baldwin, even as a teenager and marked by leprosy, demonstrated rare intelligence and a sense of strategy in the face of a changing world. Those who might have seen the siege as a mere local episode did not understand what Baldwin already sensed. That was only the first move of a formidable enemy. And although Aleppo resisted on that occasion, the seed of Islamic unity had been planted. From that point on, the young leper king would prepare his kingdom not to withstand an attack, but a storm. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like, share it with other enthusiasts of medieval history, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. In the next videos, we will continue to follow the epic clashes between Baldwin and Saladin, two historical giants who shaped the fate of the Holy Land. See you next time.